want to welcome you to our webinar entitled Making a Safe Church Protection Policy. And I'm your host, Nancy Kaufman, interim denominational minister for church safety and for Mennonite Church USA. And tonight I have invited Marlene Bolgard. She was former minister of Christian formation for Western District Conference, a former executive director for Mennonite Women USA, and a former interim pastor at Salem Mennonite Church, and has had quite a bit of experience in this topic. Tonight's gathering is a webinar format, so that means that all attendees are muted and the chat is disabled. We will, however, be posting links in that chat for your use. We welcome your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end, some that you have already sent in to us. Plus, if you have other kinds of questions that you want to ask, then you may feel free to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. And only we on the presenters here will be able to see your questions. We will also answer as many of them as we can and go from there. Whenever we talk about abuse of any kind, there will be people among us who have experienced abuse. And at times these conversations can trigger the memory of the event and the pain. So we invite you to please take care of yourself and do whatever you need to do to stay as well as possible. As we begin, I'd like to offer a short prayer for our time together. Because of you, God, and the love you have for all people, we tonight focus on safe church policy making to intentionally reflect the desire you have for your people and for your congregation. May you bless us, and may you continue to pour your love out on all of us. In Christ's name, amen. So I want to now turn it over to Marlene, and thank you, Marlene, for being willing to do this for us.
Well, hello, everyone. We're very glad you've joined us. Some of you have created a policy in the past and are ready to update it. Or maybe you're new to this process, but my hope is that all of you will find something helpful for providing safety within your church. So let's begin with slide 1. And it is our mandate as Christians to engage with this topic. Wait for the slide to come up. Here we go. Our mandate as Christians. We care about safety because our congregations are holy places. They are places where people of all ages come to meet God, to gather for worship and study and service and singing and prayer. And for us, for when folks enter our buildings or join us in our ministries, every conversation, every setting, activity needs to be safe. Right now, I'd like you to identify a child in your congregation or family or neighborhood, someone under the age of 12 that you know, a newborn, a preschooler, someone that you see off and on through the week. So remember this child and write their name down and keep them in mind as we move through this workshop. And the third thing is we care about being a safe church because it is part of our Christian mandate. In order for us to fully extend a welcome to children, youth, and vulnerable adults, our churches must be places of refuge and safety. We also find these words in Matthew 18, 1-6. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a child whom he placed among them and said, "Truly, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes such a child in my name welcomes me. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be greater for you if a millstone was fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depths of the sea. So now I encourage you to say these words on the screen, but where the blank, oh, go back one slide, please. But where it says insert name of child, let's find that screen again, slide 2. Okay, anyone who welcomes, and then there's a blank. If you would insert the name of the child that you're thinking about as we do this workshop together. So you can go ahead and just say it. I'm going to go ahead and say it out loud, and you can do that with me. Jesus said, anyone who welcomes Lucy welcomes me. All right. We also care about a safe church because it fits in well with our Anabaptist theology. The idea of providing a safe and nurturing place in the context of Christian community is very much a priority for us. As parents, leaders, teachers, mentors, we take our responsibilities to children and youth very seriously. We attend to their spiritual growth and nurturing, but we fail in our responsibilities if we neglect to take adequate precautions against physical and sexual abuse in our churches. We cannot completely prevent every child abuse action, but we can reduce the risk greatly by putting in place policies and prevention strategies. And that's what we're about today. Slide 3. Getting your congregation on board. Well, here's some ideas, and here's kind of some logic to prepare you. First of all, your liability insurance requires a safe protection policy. This ought to make your leadership board or your trustees take notice. For example, if an incident of harassment, abuse, or other harm is reported, and upon further inspection, your insurer finds that your safety policy was not followed, for instance, not a window in a classroom, or someone did not receive and document training, or someone did not get a background check. If all of that happens, your insurance company will not cover any damages. The second thing is that when parents are looking at a church to attend, they like to seek evidence of an abuse prevention policy. They want to know that the church they bring their children to is invested in safety and has an active protection policy. And the third thing in getting your congregation on board is that your congregation must understand the risks. One incident of reporting sexual abuse can damage the church's integrity in the community. It can bring about negative publicity and can impact your ministry for decades to come. The next slide. We care about a safe church because the problem of sexual abuse with children and youth is real. A brief story. Ed began attending First Church of the Perpetual Potluck, and after a few weeks, he volunteers to work with the youth group and is welcome to do so. Church members really don't know Ed, but they're delighted to have him volunteer, and he's put to work immediately. Soon, a youth group has an overnight activity a few months later, and following the activity, 2 minors report that they were sexually molested by Ed. The parents of one of the minors contact an attorney, and a $3 million lawsuit is brought against Ed, the church, and the church board. The parents claim that the church and the church board acted negligently by not doing any background investigation before using Ed as a volunteer worker, and then failed to provide adequate supervision. This is a tragic and true story, and it represents an increasing problem facing churches today. Hundreds of churches have been sued because of the sexual molestation of minors by church workers. And yet, many churches continue to think, no child has been molested in our church. So what's the worry? This attitude of denial is a very dangerous response. Doing nothing to respond to this significant risk may actually subject a church to punitive damages, which are ordinarily not covered by a church's liability policy. And if gross negligence occurs, That can expose the board members to personal liability. The lack of a prevention program leaves the children, the church, and the church leaders vulnerable. And here are some additional repercussions of impact. A single incident, go back one more slide, please. A single incident of child molestation can devastate a church and divide the congregation. Members become outraged and bewildered. Parents question whether their children have been victimized, the viability of the church's youth group, and children's programs may be jeopardized, and church leaders face blame and guilt for allowing the incident to happen. There's massive media attention, front page stories. Community residents begin to associate the church with an incident of molestation. If a lawsuit does occur, the cost can be staggering. But far more tragic is the deep emotional trauma to the victim and the victim's family. Sexual abuse can result in permanent emotional scars and a loss of faith. A few statistics which aren't fun to hear, but are current and true. In 2023, there were 600,000 cases of child neglect and abuse reported. And the reality is usually tripled because usually only 1/3 are reported. And of those 600,000, 2/3 of them were sexual abuse. Breaks down to 6 abuse incidents every minute, including Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, the most common times when church activities happen. Slide 5. So why is the church at risk? Well, here's a pretty telling list, and see if this rings any bells with what you experienced in your church. It helps to know these risk factors in order to manage the resistance that you might run into as you write and develop policies. Well, the first one is churches behave as relatively trusting organizations. Churches rely on their members and their leaders to conduct themselves appropriately, and sometimes trust persists, even in the face of questions or reports of misconduct. Another thing is that churches are notoriously inactive when it comes to screening volunteers or those who work with children and youth. Another thing is that churches emphasize forgiveness and reconciliation. If we are not able to welcome all openly, regardless of what's going on in their former life, it may seem like we're not being faithful. It may seem like we're not ready to forgive and move on. And hand in hand with that is that churches regularly avoid conflict. We like things to be peaceful. It's the Mennonite way. Being peacemakers may mean that we are not able to have conversations about tough topics in a thoughtful way with a prevention mindset. Churches are at risk because they routinely provide opportunities for close contact and close personal relationships with children and youth. I believe that faith is best nurtured through personal and trusted relationships. And we hope there is some degree of spiritual intimacy as we nurture young people. But even spiritual intimacy must be closely regulated with clear boundaries and awareness of danger. And this leads to the next one. The church is at risk because oftentimes we lack sufficient education and training on personal boundaries, like what really is appropriate for a youth sponsor or a youth pastor. I believe that a whole nother level of training needs to be put into place regarding personal boundaries and safe touch for anyone who works with youth. Slide 6. All of these factors add up to the theme of why the church is at risk. It's easy access. Easy access. Slide 7. The good news is that we can make churches safer. And these principles that come up on the slide, if there's anything else you remember from tonight, this is the key slide. Church leaders can take relatively simple but effective steps to significantly reduce the likelihood of sexual abuse in your church. These three key approaches. The first one, decrease isolation and secrecy. Increase supervision and accountability. All activities should be observable and interruptible. I know there was a question that came up about what can small churches do? We don't often have the staff to have lots of supervision. Well, if you design your policies with those first three points in mind, you will go a long way towards reducing the risk. Always ask the question, is what we were planning decrease isolation and secrecy? Are we able to provide appropriate levels of supervision and accountability? And can we always observe every event and every child or youth that's taking part in this event? In addition, if you can provide education on personal, emotional, and physical boundaries, if you can provide education on appropriate physical touch, then those are also big pluses in your prevention policies. So we're going to move on to some more specifics as we go on. But as I said, this slide really provides kind of the essential key points, and your prevention policies should reflect all of the above. And as you implement a preventative program, remember that the main objective is to provide a safe and secure environment for the children who are entrusted to your church. You are doing this for all the children that you named earlier, the Jordans, the Davids, the Hannahs, whose names you wrote down. In seeking to accomplish this objective, you will be accomplishing another very important objective. You'll be reducing legal risk and liability exposure. And every time you act to ensure that children are safe, remember that you as a volunteer or staff are also safe. Slide 8. We know that there's a lot of churches for which this might be a hard pill. Like, why do we have to do this in our church? It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem welcoming or opening. Well, that's called resistance. And if your church is developing a safe church policy for the first time, expect some resistance. I know of a situation in a summer camp where a long-time volunteer was greatly offended that she was going to be screened with a background check. As adults, we must look beyond being personally offended and look towards the horizon where we do things for the safety and benefit of our children. We do things for the sake of Derek and Juanita and all those children we named earlier. The best way, and here's the quote on the screen, the best way to ward off preferential molesters is to develop a responsibly attentive environment that puts the molester at risk rather than the children. All right, moving on to slide 9. We're now going to start looking at some things that probably are familiar to those of you who've written policies before. I call these the best practices. And again, these are the kinds of things that most insurance companies strongly recommend, or you will find most of these things in other prevention policies that you might explore. The 2-adult rule means that no fewer than 2 adults will be present in every ministry situation. Risk will be greatly reduced if the 2 adults are not related to each other. Now, there's ways to mediate this if you don't have enough staff or volunteers. For example, you can leave the door of a classroom open. Or you could have an extra adult roving around, making rounds on a Sunday morning. Now, with regards to youth meetings, we make no exceptions for multiple adults. This is the one way to reduce potential harm, is to have multiple adults. Many of the questions I have received over the years are about mentoring, and some of you may have mentoring programs in your churches. Now, how to be safe when you are with your youth mentee when it kind of feels like it goes against the 2-adult rule, right? Well, I commend to you, and there's a document that will come up in the chat. I commend to you a document on the Safe Church website, which is the Lorraine Avenue Mennonite Church policy, and they have Appendix D. And that is actually a document I wrote a number of years ago on mentoring the safe way. So you might want to take a look at that as well. All right. And now we're going to the second one on that screen, first aid or CPR training. So you may not always think about this as safety, but I have to ask you, and we are still on slide 9. I have to ask you, do you know where your first aid equipment is? Is it in multiple places in the church? Is it unlocked? Is it labeled? And who might oversee to make sure the Band-Aids aren't all dried up? You know, you gotta make sure it's up to date, right? Do you have someone who's doing that regularly? And do all who work with children know where the first aid kit is and where it's located and what the contents are? And if you take a group of kids or youth out beyond the church, do you have a portable first aid box to take with them? A grab and go that's fully stocked? Another question to go with safety and first aid is, who knows CPR in the church? And are they regularly present during your worship and ministry times? Those are things to think about and make sure to include them in your policy. Another safe practice is to have annual orientation for teachers, youth sponsors, mentors, anyone who is a volunteer or staff. You're going to go over specific policies in your congregation, specific steps in reporting an incident of abuse. You're going to include details of your state's laws regarding reporting with up-to-date contact information. And it's a good time to just do some brainstorming and troubleshoot situations that you may not know how to handle. Something maybe that's come up within the last year that you can do like a group discernment process on it. And it's very helpful to all involved. Insurance will often ask you if you are having the annual training. The next slide, slide 10. Here's a continued list of best practices for safe ministry with children and youth. It's the funny named principle called the 5 years older rule. So here's the examples. A 13-year-old may not supervise a 9 or 10-year-old. A 16-year-old may not supervise an 11 or 12-year-old. A 20 or 21-year-old college student may not supervise a 16 to 17-year-old. When a youth goes off to college, they are not adults, and they are not able to supervise youth who are just 1 to 3 years younger than them. There are issues of maturity, and there's also kind of like, are they friends with the younger kids, or would they like to date them? Or could they truly be mature enough to be in supervision? Now, if you have older adults present, then it's okay. Two adults, 2-adult rule, along with one of the younger people who don't really act in a supervisory role, but as an assistant role. The second best practice here is not to have any workers under the age of 18. Okay, examples again here would be they could work with children, but they are not the lone leaders and supervisors. They may work in an assistant capacity under the guidance of 2 adults, and if they are more than 5 years older than the children. A basic one that's been around for decades is windows in all the classrooms and office doors. Again, this goes with the principle of all activities must be observable. All right. Another one is the next slide, slide 11. More best practices, and this is the 6-month threshold, and it's a way of establishing a length of time that a person must first be involved in attendance and activities with your church before they can volunteer with children or youth. The very least you want is 6 months. The purpose of this rule is to prevent molesters from gaining quick access to potential victims. A predator will not want to stick around a church for an extended period of time waiting to get access to children, especially when they can go elsewhere and have immediate access. Sorry, I've got a little glitch in my document here. It's also kind of a hospitality issue. New folks can get to know the church before they are asked to serve. You, the rest of the congregation, can spend 6 months helping them feel welcome and comfortable. Next on the list is advance notice to parents. Notes, emails, cell phones. In this day and age, there's really no excuse for not letting parents know all of the following when you're scheduling an event: beginning time and ending time, content of event, where to drop off, where to pick up the kids, specifics about transportation and who will be driving, appropriate dress and protocol for the event. Do they need supplies, personal items? How about money? Who are the supervising adults? Who the supervising adults are and their contact information. At the beginning of each school year, each youth leader should circulate and receive a signed partition form that includes all parental caregiver information, child's medical information, and permission to go on outings beyond the church property. Parents who are informed and consulted are likely to be supportive parents. All right, then there's the participation covenant. This has to do with making sure that anyone who attends a training event signs a covenant or a commitment form. They are agreeing to abide by all the policies and procedures put forth, and then the signed forms go into the church office. This is often required by insurance. Proof of training. Going to slide 12. I'd like to suggest that while you're talking about preventing abuse, sexual abuse, that it's a fine time to engage with parents and families about general body boundaries and sexual education. And yes, you can talk about that at church. I encourage churches to look at this discussion of issues as part of a comprehensive plan. The more educated we are, the more comfortable we are about talking about it with our peers, in our congregation, in our families, the better we will be at preventing it, and the wiser our children and youth will be in becoming aware of dangerous behavior and boundary crossing. It's a good thing for everyone to know how to be safe. The next dot, implement background checks. And again, this can be a sticky issue, but to ward off potential molesters and to ensure adequate legal safeguards that rise to the level of reasonable care, every church should implement an effective screening program. There'll be more about that when we have a discussion with Nancy. And finally, the last one here, adequate insurance. It's just a good time to kind of review what your insurance policy says. They are now requiring, most of them are requiring prevention training and policies be in place with churches. So check with your insurance company, see what they require. There are different endorsements and levels of liability depending on the scope of your policies. And the next slide, more best practices. Yeah, we have a link here. The top pearl there is a Safe Protection Policy Development Guide, which is super helpful, and it is on the Mennonite Church USA Safe web page. I think that link will be available when they send out a follow-up email after this webinar. So that link will be available on there, but within that document, there's more information that should be included in a prevention policy, such as definitions and types of abuse. So we are actually using the correct vocabulary with regards to what is actually happening. The process for reporting abuse and handling a complaint of abuse. There's a document there on the safe use of electronic or digital communication. And there's also some documents on there about what to do if a known or suspected or a registered offender or a registered sex offender wants to attend your church. There's a lot of questions about that as well. So those are areas we won't get into tonight, but there are documents online and there'll probably be continued resourcing about those things. All right, moving on to slide 14. So let's say that you have created a policy, but you're finding it hard to get a little traction going. So what are some common mistakes after creating a policy? And it's so easy to fall into these. So keep them in mind and make sure you don't fall into these traps. Well, the first thing would be you create a stellar policy, you work on it, it gets adopted, and then you shelve it. So it's stuck away in somebody's file cabinet, or it's lost in the digital nest somewhere. It's just not accessible. Another mistake, and these are all related to each other, the next mistake is not having prominence and influence when considering all the activities that will include children, youth, and vulnerable adults. Always ask, always use your policy when you schedule an event. How will this policy serve us? You know, questions like, will everything be observable? Will everything be supervised? Those kinds of questions. No monitoring. Well, that's kind of a mistake too. Is there anybody really looking at the policy after an event to make sure that everything was handled appropriately? Little or no engagement between the Safe Church team and parents or children and youth. Well, I'm going to talk about the Safe Church team in a minute. But again, that's just kind of like putting it on a shelf and then not picking it up to use it or talk about it. Oops, the next one is, oops, we forgot to do our annual training. It's now been 5 years or whatever. Oh dear, well, what has happened if some people have come on board since your last training? Not a good thing. It's a good time, like I said, to review the policy, assess ongoing situations and challenges that might be addressed. And here's one, not modeling good boundaries. Okay, if you've been trained and you feel like the people in your church should know better, it might be that you're observing a boundary that is regularly being crossed. And again, engage your policy, figure out how you need to have a refresher course or maybe a personal conversation with someone. And this last one, I thought it's a common mistake not to approach using it holistically. So what would happen if you would see Safe Church as one of your core ministries in the congregation? What would happen if it was prominent on your website? We are a safe church. If you have a sticker by your door, safety practiced here. If you have it in your bulletin, we have good ratios in supervising our children. So keeping it holistically might mean that it's talked about not just with the SAFE team, but with other committees and so on as well. And my last slide, number 15. How can we keep Safe Church in front of the congregation? So this is kind of like the flip side of the last one. Don't make the common mistakes, but instead do this. So create a Safe Church team, and you might have a variety of ways to call it, but who might serve on a Safe Church team? Well, definitely your leaders, pastor, the youth pastor or youth leader, professionals who already have safety training or risk management understanding, such as nurses, paramedics, social workers, therapists, doctors. Others might serve in a Safe Church team like trained educators. Again, teachers, child development specialists, and parents might serve on a Safe Church team. Another way to keep it in front of your congregation is to do what I call develop a Safe Church culture. So let it be known, and I mentioned this earlier, that it is a basic and essential way to how you minister together and how you are in community. Adapt a proactive and holistic approach so that Safe Church is not seen as an add-on, but as a fundamental way of being Christ's body of believers. Place the policy in the web, in the church library if you have one, in the church office. This would be a printed copy, maybe in a binder. I like the idea of keep safe church events and training in the congregational news. Don't just send a couple emails to teachers and say we need a training. Make it a public announcement and invitations for parents, teachers, and staff to attend. Because the more you talk about it, the more people will receive it as something that is essential to their congregational life. Refer to the policy when seeking volunteers. Again, make sure people know that if they're going to volunteer to help with children or youth, the bar is raised. They will do training. They will sign a form. They will have a background check, and so on and so on. So be proud that your bar is raised in your church. I say place your completed policy on your website, just one click away. Don't bury it. Just have it one click away from a homepage so that those who are visiting your church for the first time or those who are inquiring about what kind of church you have with relationship safety, they'll see very quickly. And put Safe Church in the budget. Anyone thought of that? That's might be a new idea. If you do that, then you might have money for training materials or consultations. You will have money for background checks, and you'll have money for food and goodies for your training. Request the pastor to preach on safety. I say this, but also that require that your pastor attends a prevention of clergy misconduct training and speaks openly about it once it's completed. Let it be known that your pastor will be the first to be background checked, and also that maybe he or she could preach about being a safe church from a pulpit, perhaps in a sermon on safety or children or nurturing faith. So I think that is my conclusion here. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Nancy for the last slide.
I have to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Marlene. And I'll go over this last slide, but then we will be picking up questions that some of you have sent in. And so either Marlene or I or both of us at times will respond to some of the questions you have. But just wanting to remind you of the resources you have, that we do as Safe Church. We do a lot of work with providing policy development consultations or situation consultations. And then here it says, and background check services. I oftentimes, in some of the questions that you're asking, sometimes you have a question that doesn't necessarily need to go into a full-fledged consultation, but you want a safe place to ask that question. And so I invite you to contact Safe Church. The email is there, and you will get me, and I will be willing to answer questions or point you to other resources and that kind of thing, or just to walk you through what you're sort of looking for, what you might need, but you're not sure. So I can offer maybe some suggestions, and then you can choose what you want to do. Same way with trainings, because it is encouraged that you have yearly trainings. And so there would be some trainings that we have on hand already, or sometimes we have created when we know there's a certain kind of a training that you need. We're willing to create it and then make it available to others too later. So don't hesitate to make a contact, just to ask a question and go from there. One thing too on Safe Church at MCUSA for more information. Sorry. The next point is an additional resource. Everence was reminding us when they saw that we were having this webinar, they wanted to remind us that there is what's called Safe Church grants for congregations. And a congregation can get up to $350 towards anything. It can be towards windows in your doors. It can be towards consultations for helping you to develop your policy or to have your policy reviewed. It can go for that. But each congregation, just to highlight, and there's the link there for the Everence link for this, but just to highlight, it can be only $350 for one congregation every 3 years. So if you have some ideas in mind and you spend $250, you might want to wait to the end of the year just to see if you have another $100 that you would like to get reimbursed for, because if you send in a reimbursement for $250, you will not be able to come back for, well, we need another $100 now. So that was one point that they made clear to me. And I'll just mention the next webinar, but then we'll start answering some of your questions here. The next webinar is June the 18th. That happens to be a Tuesday. And that's basically, sometimes when you've got your policy in place and suddenly you have to use it in your congregation, it can be a very dividing thing for the congregation. And so we are going to be focusing on that next time. So that, oh yeah, and I talked about background checks there quickly. I wanted to highlight, MCOSA had been asked, Safe Church had been asked to do some background checks. Some people in congregations want to make sure there's some confidentiality and don't want the whole congregation to somebody in the congregation to be running the background checks themselves. Some congregations do that, some decide not for convenience sake or confidentiality. And so we have offered, we have been doing it, hopefully within the next week or so, we will have our web page up and running to help you figure out what we are offering there. But if you need help on that now, you can ask before the web page goes up. So I wanted to mention that. Okay, we're going to start going to some questions right now. And I see one question that's come in from the question and answer. So I'll pick that up. Or Marlene, you're answering it by typing. Oh, it said Marlene. Marlene is typing an answer. Okay, the question is, what again was the recommendation for youth mentoring? Number of adults per teen, 2, not 1, or on 1, right? So Marlene, you can answer that question.
Yeah, well, the whole conundrum there is that mentoring is generally one-on-one, when in fact, best practices states that we'd like to have 2 adults present with youth. So the document I referred to offers some ideas on how to kind of mediate that, and when it would be okay, you're going to go with your mentor, making sure it's a public, I'm not going to go into all the recommendations, but it'd be public spot. Make sure the parents know exactly all the specifics about what you're doing, and preferably in the daytime, never an overnight activity. Yeah, if you will go to Appendix D in the Lorraine Avenue Mennonite Church document on the Safe Church website. That's where you'll find some ideas.
Thank you. And so, yeah, Crystal is sending you the link. They're showing you the link. And so, yeah, we do have the Safe Church policy. It's a general guidelines for you to consider what are the pieces that you need in there. Anywhere from making sure that you have a purpose statement, mission statement about it, making sure that you are aware of your state and local laws related to that. And then with that policy guidelines there, right now we have 2 examples. One is the Lorraine one that she talked about, and the other one is the Shalom one out of Kansas. That they have they both have robust policy documents in that. So that's for you to consider getting some examples. One of the questions here is, how can we include, you sent us in some questions, like one is, how can we include other kinds of abuse of power along with sexual abuse? We talk about safe protection policies. Sometimes, yes, we've often just thought of sexual abuse, but there are a wide range of abuses, from emotional abuse to psychological abuse, to spiritual abuse, to abuse of power. And so and some churches have actually worked on a statement where when they name the kinds of abuses that they are caring about, they've even included harassment within the congregation. And so that is an important thing to include, that you can expand. When you are only talking about sexual abuse constantly, and there are other ways of abusing, and even through media, social media, lots of ways of working at grooming and stuff, so that sometimes when there's a complaint brought against an individual that they have abused, they limit, in their minds, well, I didn't sexually abuse, I did not have, I did not rape or that kind of thing, so I didn't really abuse. And so I think, expanding our language so it's not just sexual abuse, but it is abuse of any kind, thing for that. Another question that was given to us, somebody said, well, we've gotten pushback that this is not creating a welcoming environment if we put measures into place about that. And then another one that sort of goes along with that, how do we present this without increasing fear or feeling like it's closed? And I have a couple of things, and Marlene, then I'll ask you too. I think the language that we use kind of thing is we are presenting things. We talk about being proactive, setting up an environment where everybody can feel safe. And when we have an environment where we can feel safe, then we have freedom to move. I mean, in all of our life, you take your children into in a car. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen, but you make sure that they have seatbelts on, or various ways of keeping safe. So we already have in our culture ways of being proactive and keeping safe without being fearful. And so these policies talking about that being that way. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Well, I feel like there are some slides that kind of covered that, and hopefully that feels like a strength to whoever's asking the question, to help people understand the statistics. And I don't shy away from them. I think to kind of help people understand the reality and what the risks are. And then if there is resistance, to help people understand that everything that we do in the church to keep children and youth safe also protects those of us as adults from accusations. So it's like those kinds of ways, hopefully that logic will work on helping congregations understand what needs to happen.
Thank you. And feel free, if you have other questions, to put them in the question and answer button there at the bottom. One of the things that a number of you brought up about if a sex offender wants to attend, and Marlene, you addressed that. One of the things that Safe Church is right now doing is updating a policy related to that issue. And it's being done by a number of people who have had to deal with that kind of issue within their church. And that's one that, can cause strife in the church because we need to be forgiving, or you know, we don't want to keep, you know, punishing somebody who has been an offender, or you know, the church should be for everybody. So sometime, most likely in October, we will have a webinar on that policy and hopefully present the full thing. But if you have questions right now, you're in a situation where that issue is coming up, don't hesitate to contact Safe Church, and we can help you think through what may need to be done in order to continue to provide a safe place for everyone involved on that one. There's one question of how to stay informed of ways and timing for updating policies, if and when they need to be updated. Marlene, do you want to take that question?
Well, that's why we suggest an annual review of both the policy and an annual review of those who are enacting the policy. So that annual training can also serve as a review of the policy, what's working, what's new, what kind of impact is social media having, are our leaders cluing us into things that need attention. So I think part of what a Safe Church team does is they're actively listening and observing all throughout the year. And then when that time comes for the annual training review, there's usually some work that could be done. I would say at the very least every 2 to 3 years to be updated or as needed.
And I would say that it is good that if you are wanting to update it, sometimes, you know, you've got your eyes and your congregation's got your eyes on it. You know, it is sometimes good to have individuals outside of your congregation review. They might notice something that you don't have in it, or that they might have a question about, well, this isn't clear. What do you mean by this or that? And so that's the kind of thing that Safe Church can offer you to do that piece there. Oh, there's one interesting question, and I sort of did a little bit of thinking about this. Marlene, you've seen the questions too. One was suggestions needed on how to implement this with a home church that meets in different locations constantly. So I have one idea, but did you have some thoughts on that?
Well, my thought would be that you go back to those basic things and just say, you know, are there 2 adults present with children and youth? And the other thing would be, is everything observable and interruptible? Those are kind of the basics when you're in a home church, when you're, you know, you just don't want to have one adult with a child down the hall or in the basement or whatever. Those are kind of the things that I would say are most important in that kind of a setting.
Okay. There was one church that I noticed out in Colorado that had, as you entered the church, there was the plaque on the wall with a basic mission statement for why they had Safe Church policies. And I thought, well, you know, here's one of the ideas I thought of, and anybody can push back on that. But one idea would be to have that framed, and then every time you go to wherever you're meeting, you know, you display that someplace, because you might have guests coming in at that particular time. So it's a reminder to you and to whoever comes in that this is important to us. We care so much, and we say children, but youth, but vulnerable adults. And it's also a statement. I think a number of our churches have persons in your church who have been abused earlier in their life, and maybe you don't know it, but to have that visible for them is sort of reassuring that I'm in a safe place. This church takes this seriously. And so that would be one idea. Now, this is a really far-fetched idea that I had this morning, and maybe I had too much tea this morning. Somebody can respond to that. But, you know, if you're meeting in church, in a homes and the children are down in the basement, whatever, you know, there's such a thing as, well, baby monitors. You know, that would be one creative way, maybe, that you would have that down in the basement, so it's there, and then it's someplace where you folks can, you know, sort of monitor, not, you know, just to make sure everybody is safe and good about that. If any of you, others of you, want to put in some ideas in the question and answer time, that would be great too. I do want to remind you that April is Abuse Prevention Month. And that would be an excellent time to remind your congregation if you don't. I think when you don't remind your congregation often, and Marlene, you said about having it displayed in good places, but if you don't remind congregations often, then when you have to use it, you know, people get uptight, like, oh, we've actually got this issue in the congregation, how are we going to handle it, and what happens if there's false accusations or whatever. But reminding people, we've got this as a guideline to help us have a fair and balanced way of dealing with issues like that. So April, maybe that's when the pastor needs to talk about abuse prevention in some way, shape, or form. Or I don't think it's a bad idea. Part of the problem sometimes is we don't understand healthy boundaries, even among adults. What would happen if there would be a sermon on that? And anytime you want to jump in, Marlene, you can on that, because you got a lot of ideas too on that. Looking quickly down here through the other questions. Oh, someone did raise, and Marlene and I talked about it. So Marlene, if you want to pick this one up, you know, I'm interested in protection policies geared specifically to smaller sized churches with lots of lay leadership. Because some of these documents you look at, you know, some congregations can have 20, 30, 40 pages. Well, a little congregation going, whoa, you know, whatever. Hopefully the basic guidelines for developing policies will tell you what the basics are to include there. But Marlene, do you want to?
Yeah, well, pretty well what I had on my PowerPoint presentation in terms of the best practices. Those would be the keys to include in your policy. And another check would be to go to your insurance liability policy, because you should have one, and make sure you're doing everything that they want you to do. So those basics, I think, may serve your needs. I'm not saying there's a certain standard because it may be 20 pages, but if you only want to do a few pages and feel like it covers everything, then check with your insurance company and then refer back to my slides. This is being recorded, so you'll see the slides on the recording. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you, Marlene, on that. We're almost ending here and just quickly going down to see. Oh, there was one question about whether it would be good to have the PCRC oversee the policy. I have my opinion. I'd be interested in your opinion, Marlene. See if we join.
Yeah, we haven't talked about this. I saw that question on there. I don't know. I guess well, the PCRC, let's say what it is, Pastor Congregations Relational Committee, right? So I would like, what has to be said is what exactly is their role in the congregation? Because in my understanding, it has something to do with how's it going between the pastor and the congregation, right? So that's a very specific role with very specific dynamics. The Safe Church team, I see it being a very different role with very different content and a very different mandate. So it's a dual role. It would definitely be a dual role for that committee. And sometimes that gets a little fuzzy. It's also just because you're on the PCRC, if your church has one, doesn't mean you're qualified or you're the best person to be on a safe church team. I'd go back to the list where I suggested some lay leaders who have training, safety training, or educators, social workers, that kind of a thing. So I would say it may not be the best fit. But since I don't know how those roles are, how the PCRC role is defined in a congregation, I think I've said enough.
Well, I would affirm what you say because I think it's two different tasks. And you can get into a problem if the complaint is against the pastor, which you should be in contacting your conference leadership right away if it is that. But I think trying to wear too many hats, one committee trying to wear too many hats can cause some problems. And will they give it the full intention? Will they have the time to be aware of new resources that would help us be proactive in our ministry? And so, yeah, to wear too many hats is not good. I see that we have now reached 8 o'clock already. It goes so fast. So I just want to, if you have questions that you didn't get answered, please feel free to reach out to Safe Church. We really do want to answer those questions. And so we are available here. Hoping that Safe Church is a safe place for you to ask the questions you need to ask in order to be the best kind of a congregation who cares deeply for all who come to your church. So we thank you, Marlene, for giving your time. I really, really appreciate that. And also to the rest of you who have joined, just blessings to you in your ministry. And I pray that God gives you all you need to do what you need to do in your congregation. And go with confidence that you're doing the right thing when you're working with Safe Church. Okay. Blessings to y'all and good evening.